This episode is brought to you by Progressive, where drivers who save by switching save nearly $750 on average. Quote now at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates, national average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. And welcome back to Veep Week, Veepstakes Week, our look at the period in the election cycle where speculation over who will be the vice presidential candidate is bubbling up. There's jockeying and debating and endless hand-wringing over who should be that VP pick. A decision which maybe, as we discussed last time, might be ultimately probably pretty meaningless, except not so fast, because we are going to talk about probably my favorite Veepstakes story and one that resulted in a pick that maybe really did have an impact on the way that the election played out. It's also just one of my favorite stories with a favorite particular small detail in it from modern political history. And it is a story that I've been wanting to do since the moment we launched this podcast. I remember the list I made and I said, we have to talk about 2007, Juneau, Alaska, and specifically the cruise ship ride that led to Sarah Palin becoming John McCain's vice presidential running mate. So here we are. Let's go to Juneau. Let's go aboard a cruise ship. But here to do that, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kelly Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
So let's talk about how Palin gets picked. But Juneau, Alaska, I've been there actually, and I actually had another harrowing story from there. That's the place where I got lost on this mountain overnight and didn't think I was going to get.
What?
Oh, have you not heard this story? Oh my God!
Oh my gosh! No.
Katie and I had to get airlifted off a mountain in the middle of the night.
What?
You haven't heard this? I talked about it on the 538 podcast many years ago. All right, well I'll tell you. There was a headline in the paper next year: notable podcaster rescued off Mount Roberts. It was incredible.
You are a notable podcaster, Jody. The newspaper got it
actually,
right.
I think the paper, the article went out of its way several times to point out that we were from New York, to just sort of rub it in a little bit. But
it was kind of implied by the notable podcaster
exactly.
part.
That is so
oh
funny.
my God!
I feel like every 6 months you reveal something that I'm like, who are you, Jody?
So this was this was in 2016, funnily enough, covering elections. I took this little break and then we went hiking. We got lost. We had to get rescued. It was a whole thing. It was actually quite harrowing. Anyway, all of this is to say, I've been to Juneau, and while I was walking around Juneau, I had this story floating around in my head because it is a big cruise ship town. You know, it's where a lot of the cruise ships come that then further up into Alaska. And it's just a big part of the culture there. And the real interesting element is that a big part of the Sarah Palin story was that there were a couple boat rides, cruise ships, whatever you want to call it, sponsored by right-leaning organizations. And that is where I would say the conservative brain trust fell in love with Sarah Palin. So let's talk about what we know about these cruise ship rides.
These cruise ship rides had been going on for a while. I think they got their start maybe in the 1980s or 1990s. But these ideological magazines like the Weekly Standard, National Review, they don't make money. And so one of the ways that they try to raise funds in order to stay afloat
very nice, very nice.
Is to have these cruises where they have some of the most internally famous writers for the publication go on the cruise. They'll mingle with the guests. And so people pay top dollar to go on these cruises. They can hang out with William F. Buckley Jr. or with Bill Kristol or with Michael Gerson. And it gives them a chance to rub elbows with really the thought leaders of the conservative movement. And so it's something that the trips tend to fill out. They still have them, actually.
Oh, yeah.
But it's just a way to raise money from your readers in a way that helps the publication with its bottom line.
Yeah. So there is, in this specific case, the Weekly Standard is sponsoring a cruise in Alaska for its readers, and it has flown out a few of its top writers. Actually, Nikki, do you want to sort of paint a picture of what the Weekly Standard kind of means? You use that phrase, thought leaders, right? This really is kind of...
Well, they don't mean anything until 1995 when the magazine is founded by Rupert Murdoch. And it is basically the top publication of the neoconservative movement. Bill Kristol is its editor. He sort of like is leading the way in shaping the editorial direction of the magazine. But it has a ton of influence during the Bush years. Kristol is a speechwriter for George W. Bush, as is Michael Gerson, who's another writer for it. And so it is wildly influential because it has these ties both to Fox News through Rupert Murdoch and to the Bush administration. So even though it's a relatively young magazine, it is one that has a ton of political power.
So June 18th, 2007, this is the year before the election year, but June 18th, 2007, we have this first cruise sponsored by the Weekly Standard. Kelly, what do we know about the cruise itself?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of one of those who's who of people in influential spaces in the right-wing movement. And Sarah Palin knows this. And the moment she finds out who is on the ship, all of these very important VIPs, she's like, I'm going to sort of establish some Alaskan hospitality, and I'm going to invite them to come to the governor's mansion, which she does. They all go over to the governor's mansion. She offers to fly them in a helicopter, which a lot of them take her up on that as well. They have this fancy dinner at the governor's mansion where they're eating halibut cheeks, which apparently is like the choicest part of the fish.
How the fish smiles.
Yeah, I know, right? Just before they, eat, she gives this long, prayer of grace and thanksgiving for the meal. I mean, she's laying it on thick. I think she knows exactly what she's doing. She's like, I'm going to show these people the best time ever. I'm going to be the best hostess. I want them thinking of me. I want a seat at the table.
And when you're on a cruise ship and there's alcohol flowing, captive audience, right? So
getting boozed up. Yeah. I mean, it's very convincing. And she has that. I've always thought Sarah Palin has that sort of wink, wink charm about her that I feel like is very sort of like appealing to people who would be in her space.
And I mean, to state the obvious, this is how a lot of power and influence gets wielded, right? I got to be honest, as I sort of revisit the story, I'm like, you're telling me Harlan Crow and Clarence Thomas weren't on this? I mean, this is classic. This is exactly that
we don't have the full manifest of this.
But this is...
But I don't think that they cruise commercial.
That's true. That's true. But this is exactly that kind of thing. It's like, we're going to get these rich people together. We're going to wine and dine them, and we're going to kind of
the top writers that can write all the interest piece stories. Yeah.
I've got to be honest, I have had my time as a political journalist, and you get invited to these things, you get invited to just come over to this person's house. We're having a salon with a bunch of influential people. And there's never a sort of explicit and we want you to write about our policy on this, but it's just softening the ground. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happens here with Sarah Palin and the conservative cognoscenti.
Right. Sarah Palin, keep in mind at the time, nobody really knows who she is, but they meet this young, attractive governor who has been going toe-to-toe with environmentalists in Alaska, with the Old Boys Club in Alaska. So she can pitch them a story about herself that they find attractive, and they find it wildly attractive. The kinds of pieces that come out after this. Fred Barnes writes a piece called The Most Popular Governor, because she was very popular in the state of Alaska. Michael Gerson, you ready?
Yeah.
Called her, quote, a mix between Annie Oakley and Joan of Arc.
Which what do we make of that? Let's break this down.
The first half.
Okay, the Annie Oakley thing, sure. Yeah. Frontiersman, sporty,
Joan
fierce.
Of Arc?
What is
Does he know who Joan of Arc is?
What is he actually trying to say there?
No.
I think he's saying that she's a fighter.
Right.
Like she's going to strap on the armor and go to the fight and take the fight to our enemies. I don't know.
I mean,
I sort of see it as religious zealot. That's sort of how I...
Part of it. Part of me wonders if just Gerson poked his head up and was like, name two badass women. And someone was just like, Annie Oakley and Joan of Arc. He's like, great. Okay, she's a mix of those two.
Those are the only two I know too. So let's run with it.
It is incredible. And so, we just mentioned all these people were on the cruise. Barnes writes this cover story. Gerson writes a column. And then I really do think the key to all this is Bill Kristol, who just picks up the Sarah Palin mantle big time after he takes his trips to Alaska. And he's early on that too, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's still 2007. And a year from this, when she's finally named as McCain's running mate, people still have largely no idea who she is. But he's going on the morning shows and he's talking about how amazing Sarah Palin is. And, oh, you guys have to hear about this governor, Sarah Palin. So much so that the hosts are like, please stop talking about Sarah Palin. Just move along. We get it. You like her. Let's talk about something else. But I think having somebody who is both able to go on television and make the case, but also is very well connected behind the scenes to be whispering into people's ears about Sarah Palin, I think that makes a big difference.
And that's exactly what she wanted and needed, because no one can ever say, put me in, coach. Like, when it comes to the VP, you can't really campaign for that. You have to look like you're humble and modest and you're just happy to serve and, yada, yada, yada. So to have him sort of like go on the stump ground for her and to do this is exactly what she wanted.
Yeah. There is another cruise. Okay, so this one we talked about is in June of 2007. August 2007, another boat full of pundits comes cruising into Juneau, Alaska, and meets with Sarah Palin, who, had such a great time on the one a couple months earlier. She works her way onto this one. In this one, we know the name of the ship. It is the MS Noordam, which, I'm sure you know this, but I'll just recap it for everyone. But, the MS Noordam is 936 feet long. It has 11 passenger decks. The ship is powered by an arrangement of 5 diesel generators and 1 gas turbine. It uses approximately 216 tons per day of heavy fuel oil. But the MS Noordam was christened just a year before this. It is still kicking around out there. It's currently owned by Holland America. You could go ride the MS Noordam right now and relive this dinner with Sarah Palin and Rich Lowry and Robert Bork and John Bolton. We'll tweet out some pictures of it. But
real drill, baby drill kind of ship.
Exactly. But the Noordam steams into town. Sarah Palin works her way on it. And there's another group. I just name-checked some of them.
Yeah, but when they get there, the second group that goes, they're not as impressed. Like, they talk about how they get to the governor's mansion. They're like,
it's not that impressive. I've seen it, to be fair. But,
yeah, not that impressive. They get dinner and they're like, salmon figures, like there's no halibut cheeks for them. I do think that, do you know how like you can hype something up a lot and then so your expectations are high? I think in some ways, they probably had that feeling of wanting to be blown away and then got there and they were like, oh, that seems sort of the general sentiment of the people who attended.
Well, remember, these are fancy boys, so they want to have the finery that maybe isn't present in the governor's mansion. But they were still taken by Palin herself. Victor Davis Hanson has said of her, she has that aura that Clinton, Reagan, and Jack Kennedy had. And I do think that is that kind of wink-wink charm that you were talking about earlier, Kelly. They were definitely picking up on that, and I think that made them Palin enthusiasts once they got back to the mainland.
Yeah. So we now have the Weekly Standard on board. We have the American Spectator gets on board. Rush Limbaugh starts to get into the mix. He, of course, calls her a babe. Ugh. But let's, I think, talk about kind of moving into 2008, how Palin's name starts to get put in front of John McCain, who eventually obviously ends up picking her. But what do we know about how it goes from a couple cruise ships rides to actually being a real thing?
Well, the whisper campaign works. The regular media sources began to talk a little bit about Palin. The McCain campaign team sends scouts up to Alaska in order to figure out who this person is and whether she would be a good potential pick for running mate. But remember at the time, McCain was very stuck into this idea that he was going to choose somebody we talked about last episode, Al Gore's running mate in 2000, Joe Lieberman. Lieberman, by this point, had left the Democratic Party. He and McCain were old buddies. And McCain had this idea that his ticket was the maverick ticket. We don't do things the old ways. We stand up to the elite establishment. And nothing says I'm a rule breaker and maverick more than I'm going to pick somebody from a different party. And so he really had this idea that he was going to go forward with Lieberman, really solidifying the old man yelling at cloud energy of the ticket. And it's pretty late in the day when he is finally dissuaded of that and has to scramble to find somebody other than Lieberman to put on the ticket.
Mitt Romney's getting floated, Rob Portman, Tim Pawlenty are all being floated, and those are generally seen as a little too conventional. And I do think it's worth remembering, into the summer, early summer, midsummer of 2008, I think McCain feels a little bit of a pressure to do something to shake up the race. And I think this is the big sort of question that lingers for this story and a lot of other stories, which is, we'll talk about it in a second, the Palin pick is seen as a big backfire moment that maybe, quote unquote, lost McCain the election. But I wonder if the misguided pick of Palin is ultimately a symptom of a campaign that was going to fall flat regardless. It was already kind of trying to find its sea legs in the summer and needed to make this move, or whether it was really the thing. It was the actual problem itself was kind of making this pick. And it's a combination of the two, but I do think it is worth remembering that the pick was made from a position, I would say, of a little bit of relative weakness.
Yeah.
But it was made with a lot of forethought, obviously.
For sure.
But there was a story that the McCain campaign was telling itself that we forget because everything goes off the rails so quickly. But that same idea, we are a maverick ticket. Yeah. And I'm going to pick this young, relatively unknown woman from Alaska. First of all, now we get to be a history-making ticket, too. It's not just Barack Obama. It's us, too. All of these, disappointed Hillary Clinton voters, they're going to vote for us because we got a lady on the ticket. And the story that they were pitching about Sarah Palin was that Palin had stood up to the good old boys club in Alaska. She had bucked the Republican establishment in Alaska. And so she was joining McCain, who was doing the same thing in the lower 48. And when Palin is first rolled out, hugely popular.
Yeah.
This is one of my dad is a Republican voter. When he saw Palin, he was dancing around the living room. He was like, this is a game changer. I love her.
Yes.
It lasted for about a week, but in that week, he was so happy.
I can attest that I had a lot of friends. We were living in North Dakota at the time, and a lot of friends who were sort of on the fence about Obama. And then when Palin came out, it was almost as though McCain were no longer on the ticket. Yeah. They were voting for her, not for him. And that I found interesting because I was like, no one votes for the VP. You know what I mean? Just thinking about the way we've been talking about VP Week, it's like the vice president is somewhat inconsequential. But this ticket felt like it was going to be the one where the vice president actually mattered. And in some cases, to some people, mattered more than the person on the top of the bill.
And people forget this, too, but the crowd sizes, the rally sizes for the McCain-Palin ticket suddenly were swelling to enormous numbers. They were vying with the size of the Obama crowds. And there was this sense that this had really reshuffled the deck when it came to the general election.
But also a sense they're not there for McCain.
Right.
No, they're not there for McCain.
By all reporting, I think McCain sort of came to resent a little bit. And in addition, both the attention that Palin got, but also just then the negative attention that she eventually started to get. He didn't really fully think through what he was getting himself into. And we'll talk a little bit about how that goes sideways. But on that front, we've talked about kind of vetting being the big catchphrase here. And it's worth pointing out that the vetting process here was pretty dicey as well. So by all accounts, there's a little bit of a discrepancy in some of the reporting. But, there was this former White House counsel, this guy, Arthur B. Culverhouse Jr., who was kind of put in charge of the vetting process for McCain's VP pick. I want to know what Arthur B. Culverhouse Jr.'s day rate is. It has probably made a lot of money on this little consulting gig. But, it doesn't seem like the greatest vetting job. A big part of the Palin story is not only just as she talks, more and more people start to question a little bit, but also just there were some very clear things that caught the campaign off guard. I don't know if it would have changed their decision, but for instance, there was the disclosure that her unwed teen daughter was pregnant. That the campaign did not know, and it then became a press scoop. And then the LA Times goes and talks to a bunch of people who are close to Palin and is like, did the campaign reach out to you and talk to you? And they're like, no. So it just doesn't seem like it was the deepest vetting process, including with McCain himself. He apparently had spent like 15 minutes chatting with Palin and then had a couple hour long conversation the day before he announced her, and then was off to the races. So
this is what kills me, is that some of the top advisors close to McCain basically said that McCain was like, F it, let's do it. You know what I mean? Like that.
Let's be legends.
I was like, no, that is not how you approach. I don't want any presidential decision being made. Like, F it, let's just do it. You know what? Like, that to me was like, wow.
Yeah, and I think there certainly were skeletons in Palin's closet that come out during the campaign, but the real thing that they should have vetted her for was, is she ready to run the country if something happens to McCain, who was not a young man? No. And what became extremely clear very quickly was that she just lacked basic general knowledge about politics. And in this case, it didn't look like he'd put country over party. It looked like he put his campaign over the country by putting somebody who wasn't prepared in the running mate seat.
Yes. And actually, interestingly enough, I feel like the maverick sort of positioning and dynamic started to reverse itself in that this choice became seen as cynical and actually in a weirdly way, not mavericky, but actually very consultant driven or whatever.
Bill Kristol told me to do it. It's not something that worked out for George W. Bush, and it didn't work out for McCain.
Or what's his name? Arthur B. Culverhouse told me to do this. He's a character that I'm fascinated with now because he apparently got tapped by Donald Trump to help vet people in 2016. And, we're not going to do an episode on this, but I mean, it's worth pointing out, the Pence pick checks so many of the boxes that we've been discussing about the kind of temperament balance and regional balance and appeasing, certain factions of your party and so forth. And also, I think coming off as very cynical. This guy Culverhouse, I don't know if I trust his track record, but I bet you his day rate continues to be quite impressive.
No doubt. You're really just looking for a new line of work. That's what I'm picking up on. In case notable podcaster doesn't work out.
So anything else about Palin? I mean, we've done episodes on her before. I think we don't have to go all the way down that road about how it goes sideways. But I guess I'll come back to that first question and the question that's sort of lingering over all of this. I mean, is this a story where a VP pick really does have a big impact on the actual election?
It definitely had an impact on the way the election played out, in the sense of the way the campaign played out. Right. It changed the story we were telling about the campaign. It changed the energy of the campaign, changed the main characters of the campaign, which is not common when picking running mates. But if you take a zoom out, I don't think there's a single person on the planet McCain could have picked who would have changed the end results of that campaign. The Republican Party was in a disastrous position coming off of George W. Bush's presidency. You have the financial crisis that gets underway in September and October that is badly bungled. And McCain is responsible for some real bungling of his response to the financial crisis.
The suspending of the campaign, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And not having a plan.
Right.
Obama came in with ideas and McCain came into a meeting with between the campaigns and George W. Bush and had nothing. And that's on McCain. And so I think that at the end of the day, it doesn't change the fact that McCain was going to lose that race. But it changes just about everything that we remember about the 2008 campaign.
Yeah.
We didn't mention Tina Fey. We should mention Tina Fey and that. And, we'll maybe do an episode about, as we get into the fall, I think, about kind of SNL's role in all of this. But
yes, please.
I love that idea.
Yes, please.
But I will close by saying, I know that largely this race is pretty sleepy. A lot of this scuttlebutt is not happening as much in 2024. But if anyone listening here is putting together any cruises, I will happily come. I will eat your fish cheeks.
I want halibut cheeks.
Yeah, exactly. But I love a good cruise, especially if it's just a day cruise. Start in June, go out, schmooze for a while, and come back. I don't need to be there overnight.
Rhinovirus free, please.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, booze cruise.
Exactly.
Let's do it.
There you go.
All right. Well, we will leave it there. I'm really glad we finally got around to that story. Veep Week continues next episode with a look at a very notable and consequential pick. But we will leave it there. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kelly Carr Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
She's not from these parts and she's not from Washington. But when you get to know her, you're going to be as impressed as I am. My friends and fellow Americans, I am very pleased and very privileged to introduce to you the next Vice President of the United States.
Radiotopia.